There are moments in life that don't arrive with loud music or flashing lights. They arrive quietly. A phone vibrating on a kitchen counter. A knock at the door. A name appearing on a screen that you thought you would never see again. For me, it was 89 missed calls. All in a single hour. Every one of them from people who had spent 6 years pretending I no longer existed. I stared at my phone while the rain tapped softly against my apartment windows. My coffee had gone cold beside me. The soup I had been making for dinner was burning on the stove. But I couldn't move. Because every missed call carried a different name. Mom. Dad. Claire. My Aunt Linda. My cousin Josh. Even neighbors from the street where I grew up. People who had watched my family destroy me. And never once asked if I was okay. For 6 years. Silence. Then suddenly. They couldn't stop calling. I remember whispering to myself. What happened? Because people don't make 89 phone calls unless something has gone terribly wrong. Or unless they finally need the person they threw away. My name is Emma. I'm 34 years old. And if you had met me 6 years ago, you probably would have described me as the family fixer. The peacekeeper. The daughter who always apologized. Even when she wasn't the one who made the mistake. I believed that was love. I believed families fought. Families hurt each other. Families made impossible demands. Because that's just what families did. It took me 28 years to realize something that changed my life forever. Love isn't supposed to feel like a punishment. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. Our white 2-story house looked perfect from the outside. Fresh flowers. Neatly trimmed grass. A flag waving beside the porch. My mother loved appearances. She used to say, "It doesn't matter what happens inside this house. People only remember what they see." I believed her. Until I became the thing she wanted hidden. My father worked as an accountant. Quiet. Serious. Always reading newspapers at the breakfast table. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He didn't yell often. He didn't throw things. Instead, he mastered disappointment. One raised eyebrow. One long sigh. One sentence. I expected more from you. Those words hurt more than screaming ever could. My older sister Claire was 3 years ahead of me. Beautiful. Confident. The kind of person who could walk into a room and somehow make everyone else disappear. Teachers loved her. Neighbors admired her. My parents practically worshipped her. Claire won every award. Every competition. Every argument. And if she didn't, someone else somehow became responsible. Usually me. When I was 10 years old, Claire accidentally broke my grandmother's crystal vase. It shattered across the dining room floor. Mom walked in. She looked at the broken glass. Then at me. "Emma." Her voice was calm. "What did you do?" I remember opening my mouth. "I didn't." Claire interrupted. She bumped into the table. My mother didn't ask another question. She believed Claire immediately. I was grounded for 2 weeks. No television. No birthday party. No explanation accepted. That night I cried myself to sleep. Not because of the punishment. Because I realized. The truth didn't matter. Only Claire's version did. As the years passed, that pattern became our family tradition. If Claire forgot Mother's birthday, I should have reminded her. If Claire borrowed money, I should help pay it back. If Claire insulted someone, I should apologize because you're better at talking to people. Every problem somehow found its way to me. And every solution required me to sacrifice something. By the time I reached college, I had become an expert at making myself smaller. I chose a university only 30 minutes away because my parents wanted me close. Claire moved to Chicago. My parents celebrated her independence. When I mentioned applying for graduate school in Boston, Mom looked horrified. So you're abandoning your family? I laughed awkwardly. I'd only be a flight away. She folded her arms. A good daughter doesn't move across the country. So I stayed. At the time, I thought I was making the right choice. Now I know. I was simply afraid of disappointing people who were never going to be proud of me anyway. Everything began changing when I met Daniel. It happened in the least romantic place imaginable. A grocery store. I was standing in the cereal aisle comparing prices because my budget was embarrassingly tight. A box slipped off the shelf. Someone caught it before it hit my head. You almost got attacked by breakfast. I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. Daniel smiled. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't overly confident. He just seemed kind. That word mattered more to me than handsome. We talked for 15 minutes beside boxes of cereal. Then another 20 in the coffee shop next door. Before leaving, he asked, "Would you like dinner sometime?" I surprised myself by saying yes. Daniel treated me differently than anyone ever had. He listened. Actually listened. If I said I liked something, he remembered. If I looked tired, he noticed. If I apologized for something that wasn't my fault, he gently asked, "Why are you apologizing?" At first, I didn't even realize I was doing it. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." It had become part of my vocabulary. One evening he finally stopped me. "Emma." I looked up. "You know you don't have to earn the right to exist." I stared at him. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me. Nobody. Our relationship grew steadily. No dramatic games. No manipulation. Just two people building a peaceful life together. When Daniel proposed after 3 years, I cried before I answered. Not because I was surprised. Because I couldn't believe someone had chosen me. Not out of obligation. Not because they needed something. Just because they loved me. I said yes. I thought my parents would finally be happy. Instead, Mom asked one question. "How much does he make?" Daniel laughed politely. "I do all right." She wasn't satisfied. Dad asked about investments. Claire asked whether he owned property. Nobody asked, "Does he make you happy?" I should have noticed then. But hope can blind you. Especially when you've spent your entire life chasing approval. Our wedding was beautiful. At least, that's what everyone else said. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. Claire arrived 40 minutes late. She complained about her dress. She argued with the photographer because she wanted more pictures of herself. During the reception, Mom spent half the evening introducing Claire to Daniel's business friends. Not me. The bride. Claire. Later that night, Daniel squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I forced a smile. "Just family stuff." He nodded slowly. I'll never ask you to choose between me and your family. I kissed his cheek. I know. Neither of us realized. One day I would have to. After the wedding, life became peaceful. Daniel and I bought a modest little house with blue shutters. Nothing fancy. But every corner carried laughter instead of criticism. Sunday mornings meant pancakes. Friday nights meant old movies. Sometimes we'd dance in the kitchen while dinner cooked. Those tiny moments healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. Until my family started showing up. Without calling. Without asking. Mom wanted copies of our house key. Claire borrowed money. Dad expected Daniel to help with investments. Every visit ended with another favor. Another request. Another obligation. Daniel never complained. Not once. But I noticed. Every time my phone rang, his shoulders became just a little tighter. One evening he asked carefully, "Emma, can I ask something?" "Of course." "Why does every conversation with your family leave you crying?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't have one. A few months later, my parents announced they were retiring. They had made several bad financial decisions. Investments failed. Debt piled up. Suddenly, they needed help. Not advice. Money. Lots of it. Claire immediately explained why she couldn't contribute. "We're renovating." Then, everyone looked at me. Mom smiled. "You've always been the responsible one." Translation. "You'll fix this." Again. Daniel quietly suggested, "We can help a little." But little wasn't enough. They wanted nearly everything we had saved. The savings we'd spent years building for our future. For children. For emergencies. For dreams. I looked at my parents. "I can't." The room fell silent. Claire rolled her eyes. I knew she'd become selfish after getting married. Selfish. For wanting to keep the money we had earned together. Mom shook her head slowly. "I don't recognize you anymore." Neither did I. Because for the first time in my life, I had said no. And something inside me didn't regret it. That single word. No. Changed everything. I didn't know it yet. But it was the beginning of the end. The beginning of 6 years of silence. And the beginning of a life I never imagined possible. Because sometimes, the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who panic the moment you stop sacrificing yourself for them. And what happened next? Destroyed the family I had spent my entire life trying to save. People often think families fall apart because of one terrible moment. They imagine a screaming match. A slammed door. A final cruel sentence that changes everything. But that's rarely how it happens. Families don't usually break in one day. They break in thousands of tiny moments. Tiny betrayals. Tiny disappointments. Tiny reminders that your love will never be enough. And by the time the final moment arrives, your heart has already been breaking for years. I just didn't know it yet. After my parents asked Daniel and me for almost all of our savings, I tried convincing myself things would calm down. I wanted to believe that saying no once wouldn't change our relationship. I was wrong. The phone calls became colder. My mother's cheerful "hello, sweetheart," disappeared. Instead, "Have you changed your mind?" Every conversation started with money. Every visit ended with guilt. She had a way of making herself sound like the victim. "You know your father isn't sleeping." I guess we'll just lose the house. I never imagined my own daughter would turn her back on us. Those words stayed with me long after I hung up. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. One evening he found me sitting alone on our back porch after another phone call. He wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. "You don't have to carry this alone." I leaned my head against him. "I just wish they loved me without asking for something." He kissed the top of my head. "Emma, they don't get to decide your worth." I wanted to believe him. But when you've spent your entire childhood earning affection, it's difficult to stop chasing it. A week later, Claire invited me to lunch. That alone surprised me. My sister rarely wanted to spend time together unless she needed something. Still, a small part of me hoped. Maybe this was different. Maybe she wanted to fix things. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. She hugged me. Too warmly. Too perfectly. That should have been my first warning. After ordering coffee, she smiled. "You know, Mom's been really upset." I sighed. "I know. You could solve all of this." I looked at her. "By giving them our savings?" She shrugged. "They're your parents. They're yours too." Her smile faded. "My financial situation is complicated." I almost laughed. Claire drove a luxury SUV. Owned designer handbags. Vacationed twice a year. Meanwhile, Daniel and I carefully planned every purchase. Yet somehow, we were expected to rescue everyone. "I can't do it." She leaned forward. "You've changed." There it was again. Changed. As if growing a backbone was something shameful. "I've grown." "No. You've become selfish." Her words stung. Not because they were true. Because 6 years earlier, I would have believed them. That evening my mother called. "I heard you upset your sister." I closed my eyes. "She told you already?" She cried. Of course she did. Claire always cried first. That way no one questioned her version of events. Mom continued. "I don't know what Daniel has done to you." I sat upright. "What? You were never like this before you married him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Daniel had spent years treating my parents with kindness. Helping them move furniture. Fixing things around their house. Driving my father to medical appointments. Never asking for anything in return. Yet somehow, he had become the villain. "Mom." Daniel didn't change me. Silence. Then she said quietly. "No. He made you forget your family." I ended the call without another word. It was the first time in my life I had ever hung up on my mother. And strangely, instead of guilt, I felt relief. A few days later, Daniel came home carrying a small envelope. "What is this?" He looked confused. It was taped to my office door. Inside was a single piece of paper. 3 handwritten words. "Leave Emma." No signature. No explanation. My stomach dropped. Daniel looked at me. "I don't want you jumping to conclusions." But I already knew. Not because I had proof. Because my family believed fear was a tool. If guilt didn't work, pressure would. If pressure didn't work, intimidation would. Daniel folded the paper. "I'm not going anywhere." Those words almost made me cry. The following Sunday, my parents arrived unannounced. Again. This time, they weren't alone. Claire came too. I opened the door. Nobody smiled. Dad walked straight into the living room without asking. Mom folded her arms. We need to settle this. Daniel quietly stood beside me. We've already talked about it. Claire laughed. No. You avoided it. Mom placed a folder on our coffee table. Inside were documents, loan applications, bank statements, property estimates. Everything pointed toward one conclusion. They wanted us to refinance our home. I stared at the papers. You want us to mortgage our house? Dad finally spoke. It's temporary. Temporary. That word sounded familiar. Every sacrifice I'd ever made had supposedly been temporary. Watching Claire win. Giving away my savings. Changing my plans. Apologizing for things I didn't do. Temporary. Yet somehow, the sacrifices never ended. Daniel calmly pushed the folder back. We're not doing this. The room went silent. Mom looked at me. So, you're choosing him? I answered without hesitation. Yes. It wasn't even choosing. It was protecting the life we'd built together. But to my parents, any boundary felt like betrayal. Claire stood up so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. I knew she'd abandon us. Daniel took my hand. Emma. You don't have to explain yourself. He was right. No explanation would ever be enough. After they left, our home felt strangely empty. I sat on the couch staring at the closed front door. Daniel brought me tea. I think they're going to punish us. He didn't disagree. He simply nodded. I know. That scared me more than anything. Because Daniel rarely assumed the worst about people. If even he believed they would retaliate. Maybe I wasn't imagining things after all. 2 weeks later, the rumors started. It began with neighbors. Then old friends. Then distant relatives. One woman from church stopped me in the grocery store. I'm praying for your parents. I frowned. For what? She looked confused. Oh. I heard you abandoned them after taking all their retirement money. I couldn't breathe. What? Her expression changed instantly. You didn't? I shook my head. No. She looked horrified. I'm so sorry. By then, the damage had already been done. Someone had rewritten the story. And everyone believed it. The lies spread faster than I could answer them. Apparently, I had manipulated my parents. Controlled Daniel. Forced them into debt. Refused to help. Destroyed the family. Every version made me the villain. Not once did anyone ask me what had really happened. It reminded me of childhood. Claire told the story. Everyone accepted it. Truth never stood a chance. One evening I received a message from my cousin Josh. It was only one sentence. I know you're lying. That was it. No questions. No conversation. Just judgment. I typed 3 different replies. Then deleted them all. There comes a point when defending yourself becomes another way of begging to be believed. I was tired of begging. Daniel found me crying in the bedroom. I lost my whole family. He sat beside me. No. You lost people who expected you to sacrifice yourself forever. I wiped my tears. It still hurts. I know. He reached into the bedside drawer. Inside was a small notebook. Blank. I bought this for you. I smiled weakly. For what? So every time someone tells you who you are, you can write down who you really are. It sounded simple. Almost childish. But that notebook changed my life. Every night I wrote one truth. I am kind. I am honest. I deserve respect. I am enough. At first, I didn't believe those words. Eventually, I did. Looking back now, that notebook became the first brick in rebuilding my life. Not my parents. Not my sister. Me. Because healing doesn't begin when people apologize. Healing begins when you stop waiting for them to. And although I didn't realize it then, my family was about to make one final decision. A decision so cruel, so unforgivable, that it would force me to do something I had never imagined possible. I would cut every one of them out of my life. Completely. For 6 long years. And during those 6 years, not one of them would ask if I was alive. Until the night they called me. 89 times. People like to say that forgiveness is always the answer. For years, I believed that too. I thought if I loved harder, stayed quieter, apologized faster, eventually, my family would see me. They would realize I had been trying to love them all along. But there comes a moment when forgiveness starts looking less like kindness and more like permission. Permission for people to keep hurting you. I reached that moment on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. It started with a phone call from my boss. Emma, could you come into my office? His voice sounded unusually serious. I spent the entire drive to work wondering what I'd done wrong. When I walked into his office, he closed the door. Have a seat. I sat down, my heart already racing. He folded his hands together. I need to ask you something. Of course. He hesitated. Are you having financial problems? I blinked. What? He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a printed letter. It wasn't signed. But I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. Even before I read the words. The letter claimed that I had stolen money from my parents. That I had manipulated an elderly couple. That I couldn't be trusted. That the company should be careful with someone like me. I felt every ounce of blood drain from my face. My boss looked at me with genuine concern. I didn't believe it. I couldn't speak. I've worked with you for 6 years, Emma. You've never given me a reason to question your integrity. Tears blurred my vision. He slid the paper into a shredder. I just wanted you to know. The machine swallowed the pages. Tiny white pieces fluttered into the bin. But the damage those words had done couldn't be shredded so easily. I sat in my car for nearly an hour afterward. Not crying. Not screaming. Just staring through the windshield. How could my own mother try to destroy my career? What kind of parent does that? I kept replaying every childhood memory. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every family vacation. Searching desperately for proof that she had loved me. Maybe she had. In her own way. But love should never require you to become someone else's sacrifice. That evening, Daniel listened quietly as I told him everything. When I finished, he didn't speak right away. Instead, he took both of my hands. They crossed a line. I nodded slowly. I know. No. He looked directly into my eyes. They crossed the line. His voice was calm. but I could hear the anger underneath. I've stayed quiet because I wanted to respect your relationship with your family. He paused. But I won't watch them destroy you. That was the first time I'd ever seen Daniel angry. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just disappointed. Disappointed that people who should have protected me had become the ones I needed protection from. 3 days later. The final betrayal arrived. It was Saturday morning. Daniel and I were drinking coffee when someone knocked on our front door. 2 people stood outside. A man. A woman. Both wearing county identification badges. The woman smiled politely. Good morning. We received a report and need to ask you a few questions. My stomach tightened. What kind of report? She exchanged a glance with her partner. Someone expressed concerns about possible financial fraud and emotional abuse within this household. I stared at her. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. Daniel remained calm. Please come in. For the next 45 minutes, we answered every question. We showed them bank records. Mortgage papers. Tax returns. Everything. The investigators quickly realized there was no problem. Before leaving, the woman hesitated. I probably shouldn't say this. She lowered her voice. This isn't the first report we've received that seems personal. I looked at her. What do you mean? She chose her words carefully. Sometimes people misuse the system to settle family conflicts. Family conflicts. Such gentle words for something so cruel. After they left, I closed the door and leaned against it. I felt exhausted. Like someone had drained every ounce of strength from my body. Daniel wrapped his arms around me. They're trying to make you break. I whispered. I think they already have. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I walked downstairs. The house was silent. Moonlight spilled across the hardwood floor. I opened the notebook Daniel had given me months earlier. Every page contained a truth. I am enough. I deserve peace. My feelings matter. I don't have to earn love. I reached a blank page. Without thinking. I wrote 5 words. I choose myself this time. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I knew. I wasn't just writing a sentence. I was making a decision. The next morning I called my parents. My mother answered immediately. So, have you finally come to your senses? No. There was silence. Then I said the hardest words I'd ever spoken. I'm done. She laughed. What does that mean? It means I'm no longer participating in this. Emma, don't be dramatic. I'm not. I'm protecting myself. Her tone sharpened. So you're abandoning your family? I took a deep breath. No. You abandoned me years ago. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally she whispered. You'll regret this. Maybe. But I already regretted spending 28 years trying to become someone I never needed to be. I wish you well. Then. I hung up. I called my father next. He answered on the second ring. I heard you upset your mother. I wanted to tell you myself. I'm stepping away. His response was immediate. If you walk away now, don't expect to come back. The words hurt. Even though I had expected them. I understand. You'll no longer be part of this family. I closed my eyes. I guess I haven't been for a long time. Then I ended the call. Claire texted me less than 5 minutes later. You're dead to us. Just 4 words. No explanation. No sadness. No attempt to fix anything. I stared at the message. Then I blocked her number. One by one. I blocked everyone. Mom. Dad. Claire. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. Family friends. Neighbors who had joined the gossip. Social media. Email. Everything. With every block. The silence grew louder. But strangely, so did my breathing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for another accusation. Another demand. Another guilt trip. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. The first few months were harder than I expected. Every holiday felt strange. Thanksgiving came. No invitations. No phone calls. Christmas arrived. Daniel and I decorated our little blue shuttered house together. We laughed while untangling lights. Burned cookies. Watched old Christmas movies. It was simple. Quiet. Safe. Halfway through dinner, I suddenly started crying. Daniel reached for my hand. I missed the family I wish I'd had. He nodded. I know. He never tried convincing me not to grieve. Because grieving isn't only for people who die. Sometimes, you grieve the people who never became who you needed them to be. Life slowly found a rhythm. I earned a promotion at work. Daniel started his own consulting business. We planted flowers in the backyard. Adopted an old golden retriever named Molly. Every Saturday morning we walked to the farmer's market. Neighbors began recognizing us. One elderly woman smiled every week and said, "You two always look happy." I didn't know how to answer. Because happiness wasn't something that had happened overnight. It had been built. One peaceful day at a time. Almost 2 years after going no contact, something unexpected happened. I received a handwritten letter. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed my parents at a family barbecue. Claire stood beside them. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. Everyone smiling. Across the bottom someone had written, "We're doing just fine without you." I looked at the picture for a long time. Then I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. Because I realized something. If they were truly happy, they wouldn't have mailed me proof. People don't perform happiness for someone they've forgotten. They perform it for someone they still hope to hurt. I quietly placed the photograph into the fireplace. The edges curled. The smiling faces disappeared into ash. I didn't feel revenge. I felt release. Years passed. 3. Then 4. Then 5. Life continued moving forward. Sometimes I wondered whether my parents ever thought about me. Whether my father ever missed our Sunday coffee. Whether my mother ever looked at old family albums. Whether Claire ever regretted anything. But those thoughts became less frequent. Healing has a funny way of doing that. One day you realize you haven't thought about the people who hurt you in weeks. Then months. Until they're simply chapters in a book you've already finished reading. I believed that chapter was over. I believed I'd never hear their voices again. I believed 6 years of silence would last forever. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because on one cold October evening, while Daniel was making dinner and Molly slept at my feet, my phone lit up. Unknown number. Then another. Then another. Within minutes. The calls wouldn't stop. 1, 5, 12, 28, 46, 63, 74, 89. Every call came from someone connected to the family I'd left behind. The family that had spent 6 years pretending I didn't exist. Now, they were begging me to answer. And I had no idea why. I used to imagine what it would feel like if my family ever reached out again. For years, I pictured my mother leaving a voicemail that began with the words, "I'm sorry." I imagined my father admitting he had been wrong. I imagined Claire finally telling the truth. In every version of that fantasy, they called because they missed me. Because they loved me. Because they had finally realized what they had done. Reality, however, rarely looks like the dreams we build to survive. The first call came at 6:14 p.m. I ignored it. Unknown number. Nothing unusual. Then another call came less than a minute later. Then another. Then another. Daniel looked up from the stove. "Everything okay?" I glanced at my phone. "I don't know." The calls kept coming. When the 10th call arrived, I opened the call history. Most of the numbers were unfamiliar. Then I froze. One of them wasn't. It belonged to my Aunt Linda. A woman who hadn't spoken a single word to me in 6 years. Seconds later, another familiar number appeared. My cousin Josh. Then, my father's old landline. The same number I had memorized as a child. The house where I grew up. The house I had promised myself I would never enter again. Daniel walked over. He looked at the screen. His expression changed immediately. "They found your number." "I guess so." Neither of us spoke. The phone rang again. Mom. Not unknown. Not hidden. Her name. I had deleted her contact years ago. But somehow, I still recognized the number. Some things become part of you whether you want them to or not. The screen lit up. Mom calling. My thumb hovered over the answer button. Then, I pressed decline. 30 seconds later, she called again. Then my father. Then Claire. Then 3 cousins. Then another aunt. Within 1 hour, there were 89 missed calls. My kitchen had become completely silent. The soup Daniel had been cooking was ruined. Neither of us cared. Finally, a text message arrived. "Emma. Please answer. It's about Dad." I stared at it. For several long seconds. Then I placed the phone face down. Daniel waited. "What are you thinking?" I answered honestly. "I don't know if they're calling because they love me. Or because they need something." That night I barely slept. Every possibility ran through my mind. Was someone sick? Had someone died? Was this another manipulation? At 3 in the morning, I finally checked my voicemail. There were 23 messages. Most of them were silent. Some ended before anyone spoke. The first clear message came from Aunt Linda. "Emma." Her voice trembled. "Please call us. It's important." Click. The second came from Josh. "I know I don't deserve to ask. But please answer." Click. Then, my mother's voice. For the first time in 6 years. "Emma." She sounded older. More fragile. "We need you." No apology. No explanation. Just. We need you. I turned the phone off. The next morning, Daniel found me sitting on the porch before sunrise. You listened to them? I nodded. What are you going to do? I honestly don't know. He sat beside me. I'll support whatever you decide. That was Daniel. He never told me what choice to make. He simply reminded me that, for once, the choice belonged to me. Around noon, there was a knock at the front door. I looked through the window. A silver sedan sat in our driveway. Standing on the porch was Josh. My cousin. The same cousin who had once texted me. I know you're lying. He looked exhausted. Older. Like life had aged him faster than time. Daniel quietly opened the door. Josh looked at me. Neither of us moved. Finally, he spoke. You look happy. It sounded like a surprise. Maybe it was. I invited him inside. The room felt awkward. Like two strangers trying to remember they were family. Daniel brought coffee. Josh thanked him quietly. Then he looked at me. I owe you an apology. I didn't respond. He took a deep breath. I believed everything they said. I know. I never asked for your side. I know. I was wrong. There it was. The first apology I had heard from anyone in my family. 6 years too late. But genuine. I could hear the regret in his voice. He stared down at his coffee. I didn't come here because they asked me. I frowned. You didn't? He shook his head. No. I came because someone finally needed to tell you the truth. My heartbeat quickened. What truth? He looked directly into my eyes. Your father is dying. The room fell silent. Even Molly stopped chewing her toy. I felt like the air had disappeared. Dying? Josh nodded slowly. Advanced heart failure. He's been in and out of the hospital for months. I whispered. I didn't know. They didn't tell you. No. They said you didn't deserve to know. I stared at him. My emotions collided all at once. Shock. Anger. Confusion. Grief. 6 years. My father had been seriously ill. And no one had called. Not once. Until now. Why now? Josh hesitated. Because they've run out of options. There it was. The sentence I had feared most. Not. He misses you. Not. He wants to apologize. Not. He loves you. They needed something. Again. Josh rubbed his hands together nervously. Your parents lost almost everything. I frowned. What do you mean? The retirement money. It disappeared. Bad investments. More debt. They sold the house. The house? He nodded. They've been renting for almost 3 years. Everything I had sacrificed. Everything they demanded. It hadn't saved them. Nothing would have. Because the problem had never been money. It had been choices. What about Claire? Josh gave a sad laugh. Claire left. When? About 4 years ago. I blinked. She moved to Arizona. Married a businessman. She rarely visits. I couldn't believe it. The daughter they had defended for decades. The one they always protected. had walked away, leaving them alone. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because life had a strange sense of irony. Josh continued. They tried calling her first. And? She didn't answer. My chest tightened. Then. They tried your number. The words hung in the room. For years, I had been told I was selfish, ungrateful, cold. Yet when everything fell apart, I became their last hope. Not because I was loved. Because I was dependable. The role they had assigned me since childhood had never changed. What do they want? Josh looked uncomfortable. You should hear it from them. No. I leaned forward. You came all this way. Tell me. He hesitated for several seconds. Then quietly said. They want you to take care of Dad. Silence. Complete silence. I looked toward Daniel. His expression never changed. He simply watched me. Waiting. Supporting. Never influencing. They want me to become his caregiver? Josh nodded. They can't afford full-time care. What about Claire? She said no. What about Aunt Linda? No. The other cousins? They all have reasons. Of course they did. Everyone always had reasons. Except me. I was expected to become the reason. I stood and walked to the window. Outside. Leaves drifted across our front yard. 6 peaceful years. 6 years spent rebuilding myself. 6 years learning I wasn't responsible for everyone else's decisions. Now. The past stood on my porch wearing a different face. Not anger. Need. Need can be just as dangerous as cruelty. Because it often disguises itself as love. Josh quietly spoke again. They're not asking because they deserve it. They're asking because they don't know what else to do. I turned toward him. And why should I? His eyes filled with tears. I honestly don't know. That answer surprised me. No manipulation. No guilt. Just honesty. I don't know. Before leaving, Josh handed me a folded piece of paper. Dad wrote this. I didn't open it. Not yet. Josh stood. I'm sorry for believing them. I nodded once. I believe you are. He smiled sadly. I hope one day you find peace. After he left, I remained standing in the living room. The folded letter rested in my hand. It felt heavier than paper should. Daniel walked over. You don't have to read it today. I know. You don't have to answer. I know. You don't owe anyone the life you've built. His words settled something inside me. For years, I had confused compassion with obligation. They weren't the same. You could care about someone's pain without volunteering to carry it. That evening, I finally unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably my father's. Shakier than I remembered. The first line read, Emma, I don't know if I have the right to ask anything of you anymore. For the first time in 6 years, my father wasn't giving an order. He was asking. And what I read next would change everything I thought I knew about my family. There is something unsettling about reading a letter from someone who once held your entire world in his hands. Especially when you've spent years convincing yourself that you'd never hear from him again. The paper trembled slightly between my fingers. I wasn't sure whether it was because my father had been sick when he wrote it, or because my own hands wouldn't stop shaking. Daniel sat quietly beside me on the couch. He didn't try to read over my shoulder. He simply waited. The way he always did. Giving me space without ever making me feel alone. I took a slow breath. Then I began reading. Emma. If you're reading this, it means someone finally found you. I stopped. Not because the words were difficult. Because they were unexpected. He didn't write, "If you still love us." Or, "If you've forgiven us." He simply acknowledged that finding me had never been guaranteed. I kept reading. I don't know if I deserve your time. The truth is, I probably don't. Another pause. This wasn't the father I remembered. The man I grew up with never admitted fault. Not once. He could lose an argument and still somehow convince everyone else they were mistaken. Seeing him write those words felt almost unreal. I've had a long time to think. Long nights in hospital rooms have a way of forcing you to remember the things you've spent years avoiding. I've remembered your birthdays. Your school plays. The afternoons you waited by the front window for me to come home from work. I remembered how often I chose silence instead of standing up for you. My eyes filled with tears. Not because the pain disappeared. Because someone had finally named it. Silence. That had always been my father's greatest betrayal. He rarely attacked me directly. He simply watched while everyone else did. The letter continued. I told myself I was keeping peace in the family. Now I realize I wasn't protecting peace. I was protecting comfort. Mine. Those words hit me harder than I expected. For years I'd wondered why he never defended me. Maybe this was the closest I'd ever come to understanding. Halfway down the second page. Everything changed. There is something you were never supposed to know. I frowned. The sentence felt heavy. Almost dangerous. I looked at Daniel. He quietly nodded. Keep reading. When you were 12 years old, your grandmother left you an education fund. I blinked. What? I kept reading. She believed you were different. She often told me that one day you would need a chance to build your own life. My grandmother. I remembered her kindness. The way she secretly slipped $5 bills into my backpack before school. The way she always whispered. Don't ever let anyone convince you that you're less than you are. At the time, I thought she was simply being encouraging. Now, I wondered if she'd seen everything. The next sentence made my heart pound. Your mother wanted to use that money for Claire's business after college. I froze. No. No. Surely not. I said yes. 3 words. That's all. 3 words that explained years of confusion. I kept reading through blurred vision. I told myself we'd replace it before you needed it. We never did. I couldn't breathe. The room suddenly felt too small. I looked at Daniel. He had already guessed. Emma. I whispered. They stole my future. He reached for my hand. They stole an opportunity. They didn't steal who you became. I nodded. But it still hurt. It hurt because every time my parents said they couldn't afford something. Every time they asked me to sacrifice. Every time they praised Claire's success. Part of it had been built with something that had once belonged to me. The letter became even more painful. Your mother convinced herself that Claire needed it more. I convinced myself we'd fix everything later. Later never came. That sentence echoed inside me. Later. Families like mine survive on that word. We'll apologize later. We'll make it right later. We'll tell the truth later. Then one day. Later runs out. I quietly folded the pages onto my lap. I don't even know who these people are anymore. Daniel looked at me gently. I think you're finally seeing who they've always been. His words weren't cruel. They were honest. I finished reading the final page. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't think anyone has the right to ask for that. But before I leave this world, I wanted at least one person to tell you the truth. You deserved better parents than we were. Those last words stayed with me long after I lowered the letter. You deserved better. It was everything I'd wanted to hear for almost 3 decades. And somehow, it wasn't enough. Because acknowledgement cannot erase years of damage. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked into the backyard just before dawn. The air was cool. The sky slowly turned from black to blue. I remembered being 12 years old. Standing in my grandmother's kitchen. She had handed me a small notebook. Write your dreams down. She smiled. So no one else gets to decide them. I had forgotten about that notebook years ago. Now I understood why she'd given it to me. Maybe she'd known. Maybe she'd seen the favoritism. Maybe she'd tried to protect me in the only way she could. The next afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't visited my grandmother's grave in almost 7 years. Fresh flowers rested beside the stone. Someone else had been there recently. I knelt quietly. I finally know. The words escaped before I realized I was speaking aloud. I'm sorry it took me so long. Tears rolled down my face. Not loud sobs. Just quiet grief. The kind that comes from realizing someone had loved you enough to see your pain. Even when you couldn't. As I stood to leave, I noticed an older woman walking toward me. It took me a moment to recognize her. Mrs. Harper. My grandmother's closest friend. She smiled softly. I wondered if I'd see you here someday. I hugged her. She held me tightly. Then she said something that made my heart stop. Your grandmother never blamed you. I frowned. For what? Mrs. Harper sighed. Your mother told everyone you demanded the money. What? She said you insisted it should be spent on Claire because you didn't want to go to college. I stared at her in disbelief. Another lie. Another story written without me. Mrs. Harper reached into her purse. I've been holding on to something. She handed me a sealed envelope. The day your grandmother died. She asked me to give this to you if you ever came looking for answers. My hands trembled. Inside was a handwritten note. Only a few lines long. Emma. If life ever makes you question your worth, remember this. Kindness is not weakness. Generosity is not surrender. And love should never require you to disappear. Live a life where you are loved for who you are, not for what you give away. Love, Grandma. I cried harder than I had in years. Not because of sadness. Because for the first time, I felt completely seen. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting on the porch. He looked at my face. You went to see her? I nodded. He wrapped me in his arms. I think. I whispered. I finally stopped blaming myself. He smiled. I was wondering when you'd get there. That evening, my phone rang again. This time, only once. It was the hospital. A nurse spoke gently. Emma? Yes. Your father has asked to see you. I closed my eyes. I don't know if I can. You don't have to decide immediately. I understand. Before hanging up, the nurse quietly added. He keeps saying there's one more truth you deserve to hear. One more truth. After everything I'd already learned, I wasn't sure my heart could carry another. But something deep inside me whispered that this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about finally closing a chapter that had been left open for far too long. And I had no idea that the final truth waiting inside that hospital room would completely change the ending of my story. Some doors don't lead you back into the past. They simply give you one last chance to leave it behind. As Daniel parked outside the hospital, I stared at the building through the windshield. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of us spoke. My hands rested in my lap, tightly clasped together. The same hands that had spent years trying to hold a family together that never wanted to be whole. Daniel finally reached over and squeezed my fingers. You can still leave. I looked at him. I know. You don't owe anyone this. I know. But I took a slow breath. I owe it to myself to know I won't spend the rest of my life wondering what he wanted to say. He nodded. I'll be right here. That simple promise gave me the courage to open the car door. Hospitals have a smell you never forget. Clean. Quiet. Heavy. Every hallway seemed to echo with memories that belonged to strangers. At the reception desk, the nurse recognized my name immediately. You must be Emma. I nodded. She smiled gently. He's been hoping you'd come. There was no judgment in her voice. Only kindness. She led me down a long hallway before stopping outside room 412. Take your time. Then she quietly walked away. I stood there for several seconds. The wooden door separated me from 6 years of silence. From 28 years of disappointment. From one lifetime of unanswered questions. I knocked softly. A weak voice answered. Come in. Nothing prepared me for what I saw. My father looked small. The strongest man from my childhood had disappeared. His shoulders were thinner. His hands trembled. His hair had turned almost completely white. Machines hummed quietly beside the bed. For a moment, I forgot every argument. Every betrayal. Every painful memory. All I saw was an old man nearing the end of his life. His eyes filled with tears the moment he saw me. You came. I nodded. I did. Neither of us knew what to say next. Finally, he whispered. You look happy. I almost smiled. I am. I always hoped you would be. The sentence caught me off guard. For years, I had believed my happiness never mattered to him. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe now it finally did. He slowly reached toward the bedside drawer. Inside was another envelope. I wanted to give this to you myself. I accepted it but didn't open it. What is it? My will. I frowned. I don't understand. He closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. I changed everything. He explained that after my mother passed away 18 months earlier from a sudden stroke, he had spent months alone. Claire had visited only twice. Each visit lasted less than an hour. The daughter who had always been treated as perfect had slowly disappeared when there was nothing left to gain. He said the loneliness forced him to think. Really think. For the first time in decades. There were no distractions. No excuses. No one left to blame. Only memories. I kept hearing your grandmother's voice. He smiled sadly. She warned me. About what? She said if I kept choosing the easier daughter, I'd lose the better one. Silence filled the room. He looked away. She was right. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to ask why it had taken him so long. Instead, I simply asked, "What did you change?" He nodded toward the envelope. I sold everything that was left. The house had already been sold years ago. But there were investments. Life insurance. Some savings. I left almost all of it to you. I blinked. What about Claire? His expression became calm. I already gave Claire more than enough. Most of it wasn't even hers. He swallowed hard. I spent 30 years rewarding the wrong child. I looked down at the envelope. It wasn't about the money. Not anymore. It was about something else. Responsibility. Truth. Acknowledgement. Things I'd spent my entire life searching for. I don't want you to think this fixes anything. He said it before I could. It doesn't. I know. I can't give you back your childhood. No. I can't give you back your education fund. No. I can't erase what we did. I quietly answered. No. He closed his eyes. But maybe I can stop pretending it never happened. For the first time, I reached over and held his hand. Not because everything was forgiven. Because compassion and forgiveness are not always the same thing. Sometimes, you can care about someone's pain without pretending they never caused yours. I spent years asking myself one question. I told him. He looked at me. Why wasn't I enough? His face crumpled. You were always enough. The problem. He struggled to breathe. Was that we weren't. Tears rolled freely down both our faces. Those 7 words healed something I had believed was beyond repair. Not because they erased the past. Because they finally placed the blame where it belonged. Not on the child. On the parents. We talked for almost 2 hours. About childhood. About Grandma. About Daniel. About the years we'd lost. He laughed quietly when I told him about Molly chasing squirrels every morning. For a few moments, he simply became my father. Not perfect. Not heroic. Just human. Before I left, he stopped me. Emma. I turned. Promise me something. What? If Claire comes asking, don't let guilt make your decisions. I stared at him. He smiled weakly. I finally learned that lesson. I hope you never forget it. I nodded. I won't. 3 days later. The hospital called. My father had passed away peacefully in his sleep. I sat quietly on our back porch after hanging up. Daniel joined me without saying a word. Sometimes silence says everything. The funeral was small. Much smaller than I expected. Claire arrived wearing expensive black sunglasses. She cried loudly. Almost theatrically. People hugged her. Comforted her. I simply watched. Some performances never change. After the service, she walked toward me. For the first time in 6 years. Emma. I waited. She folded her arms. I assume Dad told you. He did. You know he wasn't thinking clearly. There it was. No grief. No apology. Just another attempt to rewrite reality. I calmly replied. He was thinking more clearly than he had in years. Her smile disappeared. You manipulated him. I almost laughed. Some people will protect the stories they've built, even when the truth is standing right in front of them. A week later, Claire officially challenged the will. She claimed our father had been pressured, that I had somehow influenced him. The case went to probate court. I wasn't surprised. Some battles end exactly the way they began, with Claire insisting everything belonged to her. Fortunately, my father had anticipated it. His attorney produced letters, medical evaluations, video recordings. Each one confirmed the same thing. He had been mentally competent. He had made every decision willingly. The judge dismissed Claire's challenge. Before leaving the courtroom, she glared at me. You think you've won? I quietly answered. This was never a competition. Then I walked away. For the last time. Months later, the estate was finalized. After taxes and legal expenses, I inherited enough money to live comfortably. But the first thing I did wasn't buy a new house, or a luxury car, or expensive vacations. Instead, I established the Margaret Lewis Education Foundation, named after my grandmother. Its purpose was simple: to provide scholarships for students whose families couldn't support their dreams, especially young women who had been told they mattered less than someone else. Every scholarship letter carried one sentence from Grandma's note. Love should never require you to disappear. Every year, another student reads those words. And every year, I feel like a small part of my grandmother continues changing lives. Daniel and I still live in the same little blue-shuttered house. Molly is older now. She walks a little slower. So do we. Some evenings we sit on the back porch watching the sunset without saying much. Peace, I've learned, isn't exciting. It doesn't demand attention. It simply stays. People sometimes ask whether I ever forgave my family. The truth is, forgiveness isn't a destination. It's a decision you make over and over. Some days it's easy. Some days it isn't. But forgiveness never meant inviting the same pain back into my life. I never rebuilt a relationship with Claire. Some doors close because they should. And that's okay. Looking back, the 89 phone calls weren't the beginning of my healing. They were proof that I had already healed. 6 years earlier, I would have answered on the first ring. I would have apologized. I would have abandoned my own life to rescue people who never rescued me. Instead, I paused. I thought. I chose wisely. Not because I had become cold. Because I had finally learned the difference between love and obligation. If you're listening to my story while wondering whether it's okay to walk away from people who keep breaking your heart, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me years ago. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not responsible for fixing people who refuse to change. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is stop fighting for a place where you've never truly been welcome. And when you finally choose yourself, don't be surprised if the people who benefited from your silence suddenly find their voices. Mine called me 89 times. But by then, I had already learned the most important lesson of my life. The family you build with love will always be stronger than the family that survives on guilt.